you have to have a commercial first. So this is my commercial. It's a great commercial though. I'm very proud of this commercial. I'm here today representing the United States Army Reserve. And you'll find out more about that because during my tour of Desert Shield and Desert Storm, I was an Army reservist that was called up to active duty, like many, many other Army Reserve units in Indiana. I'm currently one of 2 United States Army Reserve ambassadors in Indiana for the state of Indiana. We represent the Chief of the Army Reserve and the Army Reserve throughout the state. We also have a civilian aide to the Secretary of Army in the state, and those are the volunteer civilians that work with the Department of Army in the state. The National Guard has their own delegation as well. I wanted to remind everybody, because some of you are not Army, what the mission of the Army is, has been, and that's simply to locate the enemy. We want to close to that enemy. We want to attack that enemy and destroy that enemy. That's the combat mission of the United States Army. A fact that most people don't know about the United States Army is that 86% of the people serving in the Army are not people that do that mission directly. They do not, as the Army calls it, pull a trigger. They're not infantrymen, they're not tankers, they're not cavalry, they're not artillery. They do other jobs. The Army Reserve, with the exception of a very small unit in Hawaii, is 100% non-combat, part of that 86%. And I was one of those during Desert Storm, along with many, many units, 2 from Evansville. So today's presentation, I'm going to give you some sights and some stories that you've probably never read or never will read or have ever heard. I want to remind you the history of Desert Storm in a very high level. Desert Storm started in August of 1990 when Saddam Hussein in Iraq invaded Kuwait, the nation of Kuwait. In January, the United States moved to the next phase, which was called Desert Storm, where we counterattacked from Saudi Arabia into Kuwait and Iraq. And then the third phase that I kind of designate was unofficially called, started in March of 1991, the day after the ground war ended. The ground war lasted 100 hours. The United States Army, Marine Corps, and coalition forces from 30 countries performed magnificently as a combined arms team doing that. Would never have been as successful had it not been for those 86% of the non-combat people performing their job in extraordinary fashion, to include the 2 units from Evansville. Here's an actual picture of the 1st Cavalry Division, active duty, attacking in the phase of Desert Storm. This particular tank that you see in front of you was commanded by a young lieutenant. His last name was McMasters. You may have heard of him in the Trump administration, Major General McMasters, National Security Council representative. Another picture of that 1st Cav unit. You get an idea of the desert, you get an idea of the combat, the attack that occurred during that period of time. So the war ends February 28th, 1991. And I'm tasked by my boss, a 3-star general by the name of Lieutenant General Gus Pagonis. I'm tasked to lead a task force of logisticians from where I was located in a place near Log Base Bravo, which was a holding area for the 7th Corps that did the attack. And we formed up a task force and drove from Kuwait to Kuwait City from a place called King Khalid Military City in Saudi Arabia. Here's a picture driving on the highway into Kuwait. You can see in the distance the one little tall item that's there. That is the water tower near where we were going on the highway. Our planning assessment that I put together for this was that in Kuwait City, in the country of Kuwait, they would have no water available. Very close to the Persian Gulf. You can see on the map all the blue, and then the pink, top of the map by the podium, that's Kuwait City and part of the country of Kuwait. But they hadn't had water because they manufactured their own water using the Persian Gulf, which is salt water. They desalinate it, they take the salt out of it, and then they ship it to the country. So it's been about 80 days since either of the 2 desalination plants have been running. So they're out of water. Electricity has been shut down for about 70 plus days. The people that ran the desalination plants and ran the electric system fled the country when Saddam Hussein came. The only people that stayed behind were those who had to. The city and the countryside was completely empty except for Bedouins, which are people who live in the desert and move around, wanderers, and Badoons. And a Badoon generally is a third world national who has come to Kuwait to work, somebody from Sri Lanka. And like most of the countries in the world, as soon as you arrive, they take your papers, your credentials away from your home nation. And they give you a sheet of paper, it's a work paper. So all these people from around the world who had their documents taken away from them because of the invasion couldn't get their documents back because they were all locked up in vaults. They were stuck in Kuwait. They could go across the desert and leave, but they couldn't go anywhere because of no documents. They couldn't go back home. And that's valuable to understand. Food, supplies, and businesses were totally inoperable. It had been for about 85 days as a minimum. The airport had been bombed and burned up. It was completely shut down, and you'll see pictures of that. Many refugees who were stuck there, as well as many Iraqi soldiers who abandoned their units, were still scattered around Kuwait and in Kuwait City when we arrived. That was our planning. We also know, and you'll see many of the areas that were mined and booby-trapped. There were over 300 oil fires based upon our air reconnaissance that existed. And I'll talk and show you some of that. Kuwait City has a beautiful zoo. They also have a farm with animals. And both of those locations had been inoperable. We believe there would be, if not dead, starving animals there because of the lack of water, the lack of food, the lack of care that existed after Saddam invaded in August and before we arrived in February, in March. There was no government whatsoever in Kuwait City. So those were our planning assumptions going in. Pretty bleak. Think about that if it were Evansville. And Kuwait City is a little bit larger, maybe not much at all. less population than Evansville. So imagine no heat, no air, no water, no food for about 4 months. August, September, October, November, December, and going into January, you run out of food after a couple months completely. Nothing's coming in, nothing's going out. So here's where we were going. This is a tabletop of Camp Freedom. This is the Ministry of Education in Kuwait City. The little round gizmo with red is a mosque. Just to the bottom of that, partially in the shade, is a two-story, actually a three-story, has a basement, two elevated stories, where the administration operated, where my office was located. And the other buildings, the 7 of them there are warehouses. You'll see a little bit of that as we go through the presentation. We picked this destination and went there because all around it is a nice big tall wall. And that would aid in our security in case there was saboteurs or any counteroffensive. We felt we'd be able to defend with a minimum amount of defense. Our task force was made up of 3rd Army headquarters, myself from them. They were called the Lucky Tack. We had the 22nd Support Command, and I represented that as the head of that. That support command was in charge of logistics. Part of my task force planning going in on day 1 was the 10th Transportation Battalion from Fort Eustis. They're an active Army unit. And as transportation, their main mission is port security and port clearing. We also had a maintenance company from the Alabama National Guard with us. In a hospital, 150 bed hospital that was originally assigned to 7th Corps, moved to us so we have a hospital there, along with veterinarians. We had a military police company for security. We had 2 United States Army EOD teams to deal with mines and booby traps. We had a small cell from an Army Reserve unit in Chicago called the 416th Engineer Command. It's commanded by a 2-star general. It oversees many of the Army Reserve units throughout the eastern half of the United States. We had another Army Reserve unit, the 352nd Civil Affairs Unit. Civil Affairs does lots and lots of different things. Primarily, they interface with the host nation, with government, and help the government in the different roles that government plays throughout the city. So they would have a team, for example, that would be focused on electricity, or water distribution, or sewage, along those lines. We had a signal cell because we had to communicate 354 miles back to Daharan, where my higher headquarters was at. And we had a special cell from the 7th Special Forces there. The Special Forces actually moved into Kuwait City probably on the 26th of February, in the middle of combat going on, to do some saboteur cleanup and secure places, to include the U.S. Embassy. Here's Camp Freedom. Here's the entry gate going into Camp Freedom. You can see the warehouse in the back. On the immediate left is the entry to the mosque. What you can't see is immediately to the right is the building was the office building. There's a little distant picture, abandoned car in the front. We just put it there to help for security. See, we brought in some maneuver, so you have to maneuver just like you do today on that. But there's Camp Freedom for you. Ministry of Education. Okay, what was in the Ministry of Education that was so unique? If I have it, I'm going to pass these around. 2 of those warehouses were completely full of school books that had been manufactured in Iraq and shipped down by Saddam Hussein to Kuwait City for the children of Kuwait to be trained on. There are little tags on top that tells you what the book is. These are grade school books. The great big one, I've got some paper clips you can look at. But what these books do is they tell a super unique story of why people in the Middle East believe that Saddam Hussein was their second father. These are education books that indoctrinate you, the student, to believe Saddam Hussein is your second father. All the men in the reading books look like Saddam Hussein. All the civics books, they talk about revolution. The children on the fronts of them, the younger, are all in uniforms. As you look through the books, you will see that. There were 2 warehouses full of these, huge warehouses full. They were destined to teach. Saddam believed he was going to keep Kuwait. And he was going to start training and teaching those kids in Kuwait that Saddam was their father. And then the invasion was that because he was their second father and he would look out for them and take care of them. That was his belief. That was the belief of the people of Iraq in many regards. Very, very unique. One of my early missions was to provide support to the peace talks. Those of you old enough may have remembered when you saw it on TV when General Schwarzkopf sat down at the table looking across the table at the Iraqi generals taking a full, total surrender from him. It was my logistics people who set the tent up. I personally picked the table that they used. I had one of 2. We took it out of the Ministry of Education building. I picked the one that was just a little bit longer, but not as wide. Took that, put it up there, and set it up. Unfortunately, we were not allowed to take any pictures up there, so I couldn't really get any pictures. But where that happened was in Safwan, Iraq, just across the line between Iraq and Kuwait. Here's a picture of Safwan and the ladies, Iraqi women, that are at their market selling their wares. So this is the Kroger's of Safwan, for all you Kroger shoppers. Now they don't have a Walmart in Safwan, they only have a Kroger's. So that's what you're looking at, the Kroger's of Safwan. The next mission that I had was to open up Kuwait for business. To do that, you have to not only get the roads working and the electricity back on and the water flowing, but you have 2 ports where ships come in, and the ships have to be unloaded with goods, food. The ambassador of the United States to Kuwait returned about this time. His name is Skip Ganin. It's a picture with me and Skip outside the U.S. Embassy. We met 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, to talk about emergency restoration of Kuwait, what the status was, where we were going. One of the first missions that he gave me is make sure the ports are open, Jim. So I'm working directly for President Bush's direct appointment. Here's the port, the 10th Transportation Battalion. These are some of the booby traps, some ammunition of the booby trap that they found in the port. You never heard about that. Never heard about 2 ports, Kuwait City. Never heard about those ships. Maybe guys probably never heard about that. This is the port of Al Shaweik. There's another picture of the port. You can see the ship landed there. On that's the USS LaSalle. That's the flagship at the time of the United States Navy in the Persian Gulf. The people on the shore, you can see there is a small wrecker lifting a boat, rubber boat, out of the water. For all you Navy guys, we have a bunch of Navy guys in the room. How many Navy guys? Oh yeah. Did you know that you have the second largest Navy in the United States? The Army has a bigger Navy than the Navy has. That's a true story. The Army has a bigger Navy than the Navy does. Navy has about 300 ships. The Army has about 500 ships. Most of the ships the Army have are real small though, but they're all seaworthy. So we Navy guys, we can have something to brag about, so we put you Navy guys down by saying we got more ships. Here's the ceremony of opening the port back. And you can see the ambassador behind the podium, and off to the right in a white hat with the blue. Just on the edge of the photo, you can see the admiral, who is the commander of the fleet. He's the equivalent of a 4-star general in the Persian Gulf. Pretty, very, very much happy. You see a few of the locals there, but mostly the press. There we opened the port, the USS LaSalle landed, we had an official. We wanted to make sure that the press saw it, that we got it out to the public, that Kuwait was open for business, that they were a nation still operating and going on. Very shortly after the LaSalle left, another ship from the Persian Gulf arrived. And that ship, if you look closely at it on the smokestack, you can see a sickle and hammer. Right there. Believe it or not, that's an old Soviet Union water ship that came into port to offload water, fresh drinking water, into the southernmost desalination plant storage area. The Soviets used pipe to offload their water that is 10 inches in diameter. Big pipe. The United States and NATO standard for water pipe is 8 inches. We have units in Evansville that their job is to hook those pipes up for either water or fuel. We have another unit over in Scottsburg, Indiana, that does the same thing. And they were involved. They both were involved. We unloaded the water, manufactured a coupling at that Alabama National Guard, had a warrant officer and a sergeant, spent all night long, keeping both metal, taking parts off of the ship, cutting the parts off of working with a pipeline guy, and made a coupling so we could take that 10-inch water down to 8 inches and pump it far enough in to get it put in the ground so we'd have fresh water so we could start flowing water throughout Kuwait City. Does anybody know what happens to your sewer system when you stop flowing water through it? All that toilet paper and other stuff tends to dry out and get hard. And it wants to plug up the sewer system. And you keep flushing and putting more in there, and before long it's completely stopped up. And that's what we found was going on in Kuwait City, parts of the city. Because the Iraqis were using the toilets, because they were occupying buildings. So we had to figure out how to get things going. Well, the only way you could do that is to soak it. All right? We wanted to soak it with fresh water, thanks to the Soviets, our friends the Russians at the time, if you will. Refugee operations, oh my gosh, this was big. We had 2 refugee camps because of all the soldiers in Iraq that were defending Iraq, and you'll see that in a little bit. They abandoned their uniforms and weapons and stole clothes out of closets, took things they had, things that didn't fit them, and they were just blend in with the population, with the Badoons. We collected them all up, put them in refugee camps so we could sort them out. Here's one of the refugee camps. Now, one thing about a refugee camp, they don't have any food or water there. You know who gives them their food or water? A logistician from the Army Reserves that happens to be the task force commander in Kuwait. So I've got to call up my boss, the 3-star general, and say, I need a semi-trailer load of water, bottled water, much like you're drinking today, and I need raw flour, I need oil, I need lamb, I need rice, I need beans sent up for the refugees. 354 miles away, Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. My boss gets that for me and ships it up. Here's an example of what those people in the refugee camp did with some of that stuff. This is I truly believe this is an Iraqi soldier who was a cook in the Iraqi army. He's making naan bread. This is a bread made with flour and water and oil. They roll it up. You can see it rolled up in the pot and the things. They got it on a piece of cardboard, believe it or not. That's their sanitation process. And he's taking one of those loaves, spreading it out on a sandbag. A burlap sandbag that the Army uses like you would use for the sandbags here in the United States. Same sandbag that we used. Took a sandbag, filled it up with some straw, patted it down, put it on. You got a 55-gallon drum. They buried it halfway down. Got a fire burning inside, and he's taking that naan bread, and you can see a piece there in the drum, and he slaps it upside the drum, and it bakes. He dips his hand in some water. Can't see the water there. He's got a little container of water, and then peels that off, throws it in the box. And the box is down here in the corner. And that's what they feed with the rice they cook or the lamb they cook. I thought that was amazing. That's why I took a picture of it. And one of the reasons why I wondered what the hell they want all this flour and oil and stuff. Now I know. Now you know. So that's the refugee story. South Korea. South Koreans were not an active participant, but South Korea has an embassy in Kuwait City. The ambassador calls me up and says, Jim, we need somebody to come and sweep the South Korean embassy to make sure it's clear because the South Korean ambassador is returned. He's sitting in my living room asking for help. And so all my troops are out. So my driver and myself, we go to the South Korean embassy and I cleared the embassy. By education, I'm an Army engineer. I went through officers candidate school and learned how to do booby traps and things like that. I've had EOD teams that I've worked with over the years, so I figured it was pretty safe. Took a chance. Stupid? Probably. Was there anybody else to do it? No. You do what you got to do. Was I worried? No. So there's the Kuwait flag, or the South Korean flag, and the South Korean embassy after I cleared it on a hot sunny day. All right, 3 ships full. 3 ships full. Very important story. Here's some equipment. This is captured Iraqi equipment that we went out on the desert and collected up. This story started, I was never going to do anything like this. Never anticipated it, wasn't in our assumptions. The ambassador calls me in one day and he introduces me to Mike Callahan, Mr. Callahan. Mr. Callahan says, I need an aircraft, a transportation platoon, and I need to use maintenance people in a maintenance company to we're going to go collect up ammunition and Iraqi equipment. You're going to do what? I need to do what for you? I'm here for the emergency restoration of Kuwait. I'm not here for a scavenger hunt or a police call of the desert. I don't know if I can do this, sir. Ambassador says, well, Jim, we need this done. So I get on the phone, I call my boss, Lieutenant General Bugonis. General Bugonis, I just got a request from the ambassador and a Mike Callahan. General Bugonis says, Major General Mike Callahan, commander of the 24th Infantry Division, retired about 4 or 5 years ago. Give him what he wants. How can I help? Oh, shit. So I'm in the scavenger business now, doing emergency rescue of Kuwait. And that heavy equipment maintenance company, the National Guard from Alabama, and a transportation company from the Army Reserves, or platoon from the Army Reserves, comes up to Kuwait City and we bed them down. I have 2 Special Forces Lieutenant Colonels working for me and 2 sergeants who speak fluent Arabic. They come, we start going in the neighborhoods recruiting people to go to work for us. We end up with 300 Badoons. Most of them were Palestinian. We vetted them as good as we could. We paid them $10 a day and 2 meals. They showed up. You put them in a bus, bussed a bunch of them out to a spot where we had located ammunition, put them on the floor. They physically manhandled case after case after case of ammunition, put it on those trailers. We transported them to port. Maintenance people went out on the floor and captured equipment. There's some more of the stuff we took. Lots of artillery pieces, anti-aircraft. Some more. So much that I filled 3 ships, which General Callahan was shocked we could get that much. What happened to that full ship of ammunition and those 2 ships of captured Iraqi equipment? It went to other destinations. Bauerle translation. It went to the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. We sent it to Afghanistan for the Afghan Northern Alliance military. Some of the things that we also captured, this is a Soviet designed and built Sagar missile. It's a ground-to-air or ground-to-ground missile, very effective. So that's the ammunition story. You'll never hear about it, never know about it. Now let's talk about a beach party. Everybody likes going to the beach, having a beach party, right? Soldiers do too. Soldiers do too. This was no ordinary beach party though. This beach was loaded with these kind of mines. These are Chinese mines. They have very little metal in them. They're mostly plastic and rubber. They're extremely difficult to detect. They're very easy to arm. They have a little pin that pulls out and they're armed. Almost any of you with a demonstration could be out laying mines on the beaches in Kuwait. Here's what the beaches in Kuwait looked like when I arrived. That's what you see the beaches. We have tangle wire and landmines in amongst that, all along the beachfront. You can see the beachfront runs quite a ways around Kuwait City. I'll show you why in a little bit. There's another picture of some more beach. The Iraqis even built pillboxes there to use on that. Here's some more of the defenses in and around Kuwait City. See all the little dots and things. I was in a helicopter that day along the coastline looking at. The next one, for all you oldsters like me, we used to have Lucky Strikes, Camel cigarettes. Smoke them if you got them was a very common saying when I was in the Army back in 1968. Smoke them if you got them. I always remembered the advertisement for Camels. There's a camel. Did you know that camels come in various colors? They're not all camel colored. There's white camels or cream color. There's black camels. There's milk chocolate brown camels, as well as camel colored camels. Here's an oil fire in Kuwait City. This is a beautiful, bright, sunshiny day. If you look in the sky, you'll see there's no clouds. Well, look what it looks like. Here's some more oil fires going on. You see them in the background, a little bit of a shot in the background. It's in southeast of Kuwait City. Here's some more northeast of Kuwait, different area. Al-Dawa on the Highway 80, which goes to Basra. Here's some more south. These were, you could easily see, they were very close to us when we were at Camp Freedom. If the wind blew from the south to us, it was like midnight any time of the day. Any time of the day. I threw away 4 uniforms because they would not even come clean. So we get the red deer and the wildcatters. The ambassador tells me we got red deer coming in. You need to help them out, get them set up. So we got to get these oil fires out. It's going to take years and years and years. You can see all the oil fires. Red Deer and his team come in. They land at the airport. I'll show you the airport in a little bit because we had to get that opened up earlier as well. So here's some of Red Deer's gear. This is what they call a capper or a snuffer. It's a big long arm that's pulled behind, and the arm lowers them over the oil fire, and then they can cap it. We're going to go through that process. They also, so the stuff doesn't melt, they have what they call a fire hose house. They hook a big fire hose from this, and they shoot water on the fire while they're putting that cap on. They have water pumped into this, lots and lots of water on that to get it out. There's a back picture of that firehouse hose, and you can see the water trucks in the back. Lots and lots of water trucks. Guess who had to fill the water trucks up? Guess who had to get the water trucks to get them filled up? Just one of those little details. Happens every day. You just go over to your local water truck company and say, I need 20 water trucks, 2,500 gallons to 7,500 gallons. Help me out here. No. Remember, there's no businesses in Kuwait that's working. There never was a business in Kuwait that had water trucks. Those came 354 miles away or further. They either came from Riyadh or Dhahran in Saudi Arabia. So here's you can see the pipe laid out, Army Reserve unit helping out, laying for the water. You can see the capper going on and put down. We've actually capped one of the wells. I'll show you a close up of that. You can see the capper. You can see on the left, you can see the fire hose. On the right, the capper. You can see the device they use to cap the oil fire. You can see how the ground is so hot from the fire, it actually melts the sand and makes like a glass out of it. And that's the black all around that. Amazing. So here's a close-up. I wanted you to know I was there. I'm in the picture. See me on the corner. There I am with a couple of the wildcatters that I work with all the time in the back. It's amazing, unbelievable activity. I could never, ever dreamed this is how you put an oil fire out. Here's the guys, we got them some cold water. Again, Army logistics providing the civilian support through the ambassador, helping them out, working on putting out the oil fires. That's the oil fire story. And by the way, Red and his team, after about 3 weeks, they were on their own. They were able to get their own logistics people in and take over. We didn't have to do any more of that. I think they got all the oil fires out within a year. In the original estimates, it would take 5 or 6 years. Next story I'd like to talk about is the 300 Palestinians and the Bedouins. Remember, we hired 300, mostly Palestinians and a few Bedouins to go out on the floor. But here they are with one of the 2 meals. We bring them in the morning, feed them breakfast, put them on the buses, and ship them out for the whole day. We give them a little bag lunch to take for lunch, and things like that. All right, know your enemy. Know your enemy. Here's a picture from the Iraqi Army's point of view. This was at a palace located in Kuwait City. This was the core headquarters for the Iraqi military to defend the country that they invaded. You can see the big red arrow is the water. They thought we were coming in via the sea. The Navy guys were going to attack on the beaches. That's why they had all those mines on the beaches and stuff. You can see that, but you can see further the depth that they had in their defenses. I'm not going to pass it on, but if you'd like to see them afterwards, I helped myself with a few of the things that made up that sand table. Extra proof that I was there, and give you an idea of the Iraqi military's strategy and tactics. Here's another picture in that same palace. You can see the fella in white. He's kind of overseeing this. He didn't live there, but he was an early arriver from Kuwait that came back, and he kind of moved into the palace. But you can see that the defenses in depth that the Iraqi army had planned. One of the 2 torture chambers they had, they capture somebody, they were going to put them in the torture chamber. The device in the back, the brown with a big shining spot in the middle, is a kind of a rheostat electricity. They ran electric cables to the metal bed, strap you down on the bed, turn the current up a little bit at a time until they get the answer that they wanted to hear you say. That was their torture device. Here's another one. This one was a little more German in nature. Strap you down on the table and help you with your teeth. You need to have a little dental work done without any help from anesthetic. That was the idea behind this one. Very, very nice. They got lots of people to talk if they captured them, I'm sure. So now I want to talk about my ACRV story. Most of the divisions, while we're out gathering up gear, they're out gathering up a souvenir to bring back to their military base. So I called back to my boss, who was a 1-star general at the time, the unit I was in, the Army Reserve unit that I was in. Hey, can we get us a tank to put in front of our reserve center? Sure. Okay. I go out one day with the guys from the Alabama National Guard. We find a spot that's got what you see. We had 6 drivers, we had 7 pieces of equipment. So the colonel had to drive the 7th piece of equipment. That's this guy right here with the door open on the right. They got it running. As an enlisted man, before I was a commissioned officer, I was a Persian missile crewman. I learned how to drive a tracked vehicle because at the time a Persian missile was on a tracked vehicle. That's a whole story for another time. Here it is. I drove it off, got a picture with it. We were going to send back to the United States and do that. There's what the inside of it looks like. It's a armored cavalry reconnaissance vehicle. They got it back to the States and they confiscated it from me. They took it down to White Sands because it had electronics that the United States military had never seen before, Soviet electronics. So they wanted to hook it up, try it, see how it works, see how the electronics works. We finally got it back, and there's another picture, some of the electronics and things. You see on the bottom there's a bunk, a couple mattress pads for a couple soldiers to sleep on out in the middle of the desert. So that piece of gear actually did come back to the United States, actually did sit in the Reserve Center on Kessler Boulevard in Indianapolis. So we closed that Reserve Center, and now it's over at Fort Harrison at the Reserve Center there. Stanford and Sons. How am I doing on time? About done?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there was a lot of other stuff. Here's an example of a T-62 tank that the M1A1 heavy Abrams tank, one shot from a mile away through a berm of dirt, direct hit, direct kill. One shot. Depleted uranium round. Here's another one that was caught in the open. I didn't get a good picture. I wish I had gotten a different angle because this one's got a hole you could put your head and see all the way through it, where the depleted uranium round went all the way through the tank. That's a T-72, by the way. That's the latest and greatest Soviet or Russian tank. That's what they're using today, 62s and 72s, over in Russia with the Ukraine. Here's some more of the captured equipment. On the right, kind of the point of things are RPG, very devastating in Vietnam, very devastating. They have an explosive that hits, spreads, passes through the reactive armament on site. And the one that looks like a stick with the black handle is a hand grenade. This is the Valley of Death, Highway 40. You can see all the equipment. This is the road leading out of Kuwait and Iraq that our A-10s, F-14s, F-16s, our Air Force stuck it to them right there. Big holes in it. You can't see there, big holes in the asphalt. Both sides of the road are very soft sand. It's almost like getting caught in quicksand going up that way. The last piece of my restoration, last mission we had, was the Black Horse and Blue Hats. The UN peacekeepers came in to establish a border in Iraq. They flew into Kuwait City. Guess who has to receive them, house them, clothe them, give them equipment, give them 90 days worth of food and water? This is the UN peacekeepers. This is the Blue Hats. This guy on my right there is a 2-star general. The person on the other side of me there, he's like the number 3 guy in the UN for support, undersecretary. So we housed them up in a place called Doha, next to one of the desalinization plants. And here's a picture of the desalinization plant. You can see the smoke coming out of the 2 stacks. That's where they pull water out of the Persian Gulf. We housed them just to the east of that. There you get a better picture. You can see the smokestacks from the desalinization plant, and you can see the equipment that we put together for the UN Peacekeeping Force and the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, who was the U.S. follow-on force. Some more of that equipment being stored. Those warehouse areas there we filled with food, water, and a lot of other equipment for them. They show up and they have their personal gear. That's it. School's out. Here's a picture of the mosque. There's another picture of the warehouses. You can see along the warehouse area where we have the military police, the headquarters. Another view of Task Force Camp Freedom. One of the rare days I was in the office. This is where we had a lot of dignitaries and things would come up, wanted to see what was going on. So this is getting to be late in July, and it's like I'm I'm the hostess or the host for all the social events. They want to come in and get meals like, we got steaks and everything else. No. These guys are, they're high rollers and they're looking for a handout. The airport, here's what the airport looked like. United States Army Reserve, a major from New Jersey who was a deputy commander of the Newark Airport, actually ran the airport for me. An Army reservist. An Army reservist. Here we are unloading a C-17 at the airport. More airplanes at the airport. We reopened the airport. That happens to be a burnt up aircraft on the airfield. We need to get that cleared off. You can see some more pictures from outside of Camp Freedom where the fires are. And I'm going to stop. Be happy to answer questions from the audience.
Yeah, 2 or 3 questions for you, Jim. I've got a box back of the room. It's practice, not bombs, but practice booby traps and things. I'll pull them up, let you see them. They were given to us by somebody at the airport here recently. But being in that war myself, you don't know what you're doing. You're a pawn. And I was floating around the ships, and he said we were going to probably go into shore. And we had a flotilla there, probably of 40 ships or so, and we were in what you call a Gator squad. So we had all the Marines on board, about 15 of Marines on board. And it was pretty silent the day we went and invaded. And we were faint. We didn't know we were. At the time, we thought we were all going in. So Marines were very sober that day. And we thought we were going in, but we got close to shore, I think 25 miles, and then we turned the other way. But I think it held some of the ground troops in abeyance. So you're out there as a soldier, you don't know. And I doubt if he knew everything that was going to go on when he was in that war, but I'd like you to say, did you know everything was going to happen?
I knew much, much more than most people ever knew. I knew exactly when the ground war was going to start 3 days in advance. I worked closely at 3rd Army headquarters. The whole presentation I have on a Desert Shield and, that I could have given, and it takes another hour. So
our head of our ship was a captain, and he would fly off in a helicopter about every other day and go to another ship, because I don't think they wanted any information. Go to the other ship, and all the admirals or captains would talk. They would know what would go on. But we were all pawns. You're pawns because a surprise is very important in war. And I found that as a soldier or a sailor at that time, I didn't know what was going on. I just going to do what I was supposed to do. And that's what happened a lot in World War II, and it happened in this war. He was with the higher ups, so Schwarzkopf knew what he was doing, and he got close to that guy.
Yeah, I briefed General Schwarzkopf personally twice. Once at Log Base Alpha before the war, and once after the war, after I returned to Dhahran, finishing up my responsibilities in Kuwait City, became the chief of staff of the command with regard to that. But when I was, before the war started, during Desert Shield period, when we were building up in December, we had 2 lieutenant commanders from the Navy that were stationed full-time at 3rd Army headquarters in King Khalid Military City. And we had a briefing every day. We would get a briefing from the Air Force about the air battle that was going on. We'd get a briefing by the Navy. We interfaced with the Navy because we were still receiving ships, large numbers of ships, with more and more equipment and troops. For those of you old enough to remember, not many of these are 30 years old or 40 years old, so you may not remember this, but the first thing that happened is the 82nd Airborne goes in August, and they're just ground troops. And they're there to hope that Saddam doesn't keep coming to Saudi Arabia. And then we add a little bit, and finally we get the 18th Airborne Corps. There we have a mechanized division, the 24th Division that's there on the ground, so we feel a little bit better. And then General Schwarzkopf decides that we're going to kick him out. We're taking back Kuwait. And that's when General Schwarzkopf gets the entire 7th Corps from Germany to come. And that's when my reserve unit in Indianapolis got activated. My boss, the 1-star, came over to my house Friday after Thanksgiving, asked me to come out and sit in front of his car and said, Jim, I'm leaving in 3 days for Kuwait. Our reserve unit's been mobilized, and you need to be there by the 15th of December. And this was like the 28th of November. I guess we did. Army reservists, never deployed, even in Vietnam, activated, fully trained and operational and deployed in 2 weeks. Got there and we found logistically that the people who had been working 20 hours a day, and they were just completely depleted of energy. I took 156 members of my reserve unit. We did have one casualty from Indiana, a young lieutenant by the name of Lori Lawton. Lori was a grad student at Purdue University. She got run off the road. We believe a Kuwaiti run off the highway and rolled the highway.
So if you look at the United States military, we built up until about 1988 or 89. Then 3 big things happened in 89. The Tiananmen Square happened, but that, not so much as Russia fell apart, about 89. So then Reagan had built up, we had close to 625 ships at that time. We had close to 2 million active duty troops. Right now we'd be lucky to have 500,000. So that was 89, everything started descaling. It's called BRAC. They were closing places left and right. Then this war happened, so we brought the troops in, and a lot of reservists were used at this time, more than we'd used reserves in other wars.
Completely. I mean, I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I can tell you during Vietnam we used draftees. I was a draftee, a commissioned officer through Officer Candidate School, but we almost used 0 National Guard or Army Reserve to support the Army. So a unit here in Evansville, I think, is one of 3 or 4 National Guard units as a unit that was activated and deployed and served very, very well.
Our ships, we would go in a circle because we were scared of these mines he's talking about. We would stay in the same circle out there and keep that circle because we didn't want to get off that circle because it had been cleared by all the minesweepers. And one of our ships, I think it was the Iwo Jima, it was a ship like ours. It was called an LPH, and it got hit by a mine, so it scared the devil out of all of us. It killed a few people, but mines are a big problem. Hitler put a lot in the North Atlantic, and if you look at Japanese harbors, there are a lot of mines there. So mines are a problem in war, and that feint was really held the troops, held the Iraqi troops to the shore, and they weren't ready for them to come in with all those tanks. But we've gone over an hour or two. Any other questions? Anybody other questions? Sheila.
Judy Morton asking what was the temperature there?
Probably 60 degrees.
No. In December, in the northern part of Saudi Arabia, at nighttime, the bottled water actually froze on the top. And I slept under a wool blanket because my blood had thinned out, because during the day, it was up into the mid-80s. When I was in Kuwait City, for the time I was there, the average temperature every day was at least 110, if not we had a few days that went 130. And it stayed that way when I went back down to Saudi Arabia through the entire summer. That's why if you ever go to the Middle East, nobody works during the day. They'll work until like 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and then everything shuts down until like 6 o'clock at night and stays open until 10. It's because it's just too hot to do anything. I mean, you could watch the roads just wave, the asphalt on the roads just wave into the heat come off of it. And those those Badoons that we had, those Palestinian kids, men and women, civilian clothes, some of them, with sandals and wool and a shirt on like I've got. It's all they've got, no hats, no nothing. I mean, it's incredible amount of ability that they did loading that ammunition for a whole ship. And I mean, an ammunition ship is huge. It's like this warehouse about 10 times over. That's how big a ship we're talking about. It's huge.
How many men are now in an Army division?
I can't tell you with 100% certainty, but planning purposes, about 5,000. We put about 5,000 per division.
And what was it with World War II? About 18,000?
No, I don't think it was nearly that big. Probably a smaller division during World War II is probably smaller. Probably 3,000 in World War II. And the difference being is that in World War II you didn't have as much support as we have today. Today, the more support and more lethality, things along those lines. I mean, the division today, that's why our Army is drawn down with so many divisions, because a division can do today what like 4 or 5 divisions during World War II could do. Our capabilities is just phenomenal. We synchronize up so that tanks, for example, are so that if we've got 2 tanks that we're going to shoot at, we don't have 4 tanks locked on and shooting on them. We've only got 1 tank. So you have 2 tanks, 1 tank will take 1, another will take 1, and we save the other 2 rounds. World War II, you might have 3 or 4 tanks firing on the same tank. We don't do that anymore. It's just the technology that is just so much, and you can see some of that in reports on Ukraine now, for example, with our long artillery capability. We're just pounding the Soviets or the Russians and taking back a lot of land. That's because the U.S. Multiple launch rocket systems, MLRS, are so lethal and so smart. Again, you saw that with Ukrainians early on when the Russians tried to take Kyiv. Shoulder fire weapon. It's fire and forget. The javelins, those are just phenomenal. Stingers, those are just unbelievable capable. So much so that I was talking with the commandant of the engineer school from Fort Leonard Wood about how the Army leadership is going to rethink, if you will, heavy weapon maneuver and things. As we saw with the Ukrainians, there's a couple guys in a vehicle with a bag full of short-range missiles. They could take 6 or 7 tanks out, no trouble at all. They're highly maneuver, highly fast. Just got to fix them and shoot them, and boom. That's the everybody doesn't understand. The U.S. Army equipment is, in large part, more deadly than any of our competitors. The Russian tanks, for example, their best tank has big guns, very, very capable of things, but they can't shoot and move at the same time. Our M1A1 heavy Abrams tank can travel at 35 miles an hour, lock on a target, and while still traveling at 35 miles an hour, fire 1 round of depleted uranium and have 1 hit and 1 kill. No other military has that. The Chinese do not have that either.
How big is that Abrams tank compared to our tank back there? Our tank's 67,000 pounds. How big is the Abrams?
I think an Abrams is about 72 tons.
So double the size of
Oh,
that.
at least double the weight, yeah. And the heavies have reactive armor side of them. So if they get hit, that rather than let that round pass through into the tank and damage the inside, have the ammunition go off and kill the people, it has a plastic explosive on the sides and outside. That plastic explosive explodes or shoot the direction. So if there's an RPG coming in, it's blasted it out. So it saves the tank and the people inside. Next question.
Don Schmidt. Do you have any information, or were you involved in the capture of Saddam or the elimination of Uday Hussein?
No, that was in the next Gulf War. That happened in 2004 timeframe was when that started. Yeah. And I retired in 2000. So nope, didn't get into that one. 2's enough. Believe me, 2's enough. Don't need a third. I did get to go. I had a unique vacation thanks to President Nixon in Vietnam. I spent 30 days on vacation in Cambodia as we invaded Kuwait and the sanctuaries officially. Now, what I knew and most people didn't is before that I had spent about 5 months in Cambodia because the CAF troop I supported, the lieutenant colonel, he was on the wrong side of the river. And as an engineer officer,
I'm going to pull a couple of these things out just to the microphone here. We just got this from the guy at the airport, but Jim's going to tell us about this. He's never seen them before. But these are little booby traps that were used in World War II. Maybe Jim, you've got the wire, you've got the ropes, and you can tell us how these things work, Jim. I know you've never seen them before, but if you had to do some of that stuff, you can tell us how this stuff works. These are all fake ones they used in practice. But if you remember in the Civil War, they said, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." Admiral Farragut's a famous quote. But the torpedoes were just mines in the Mobile Bay. They were not torpedoes. They called mines torpedoes at that time. These are not underwater mechanisms, but
this is a blasting cap, high explosive blasting, that fits in this anti-handling device. Has three prongs on the top, and those three prongs you have a landmine that'll go underneath this, usually for a personnel mine. You have a pin on the side you can attach across tripwire. So you have a mine, you'll bury that and leave this above the ground. Somebody steps on it, sets off the mine, or if they hit the crosswire, it'll trip and set off the mine. So that's what the fuse and handling that is. This is a mine that could go in. There's some more blasting caps, essentially what these are. Very high explosive bottom of this cap, and the idea is that you either light it with a fuse to ignite it, or you tilt it and create electric shock that then sparks, detonates this, and the high explosive in the blasting cap will then set off the explosive in the landmine, whether it be a tank or a snow mine. These are just personnel mines. This is some wire. This is a spool of wire. Recognize this from my Vietnam days and OCS days. Just a spool of wire that you string out to connect to one of the ends of those. And this is not a wire at all. This is a can. This document, or this can, is designed to hold blasting caps. It has normally it has a piece that fits on top of it, and it has like a coffee can with a little key that you twirl around to open it up, and then inside it there's a wooden that holds blasting caps. So you want to keep the caps away from the explosives of the landmines. They're put in this for shipping and handling purposes, and then when you get to the place where you want to put your mines in the ground, this is what you do that with.
Other questions? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Maybe stand and he'll repeat it. This is Mike.
Uncle Mike Quinn.
I think we all listened to the news stories while all this was going on. You had a front row seat and knew a lot more than even the people out in the field. Can you give us an example of the, worst case of the media not knowing what they were talking about versus what you knew?
It's an outstanding question, and there weren't many things that the media were saying that were wrong, and the reason that happened is because we intentionally managed the media all the time. I had the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment from Germany would follow on force that came up to Doha as we were moving all the divisions back to Europe and back to the United States. They were the just in case. Saddam reconstituted, wanted to do some things, and it was before the UN peacekeeping force was built along the southern border. They were going to violate the surrender agreement. Well, they had a particular make and model of a truck that the transmission overheated, and it didn't have a work order to fix that problem, and a couple of them caught on fire in a motor pool. You saw some pictures of a lot of vehicles together. Well, they had two that caught on fire in a motor pool, and it expanded, and we had like 17 kids that got burnt and injured, and the press wanted to go up immediately. And we kept them white. We wouldn't let them go. We wouldn't give them vehicles. They didn't have their own. All right? So we wouldn't give them vehicles or drivers or security to go with them. We made them stay in the pool, and then we fed them information from the pool. The other thing that we did is where we wanted them to be, we asked them and implanted them with the units and the soldiers and put public affairs and press camp people with them to manage the circumstance. That was one of the reasons I and my guys couldn't take pictures of the peace talks in Safwan that occurred. I didn't bring it, but I have a small metal cookie container of dirt and sand I picked up and put in there as my piece of Safwan and peace talks on that. But and if you saw those on TV, and I think they were, I didn't, but they were widely publicized. They, again, the table, we had two to choose from. I picked one, and that's the one they used to peace talk. But people don't think about it. You think, oh, gee, there was bottled water, there was fruit on the table, there were chairs, they were in a.
Time for new batteries.
Testing. Here you go. I've got one.
They were, nice tents and things up there. There's nothing. This is a desert floor. I mean, it's like out in the middle of the airport. Go sit up in the middle of the airport, and for a surrender ceremony. You gotta get the tent up there and erected. You gotta get the table and chairs in there. You have to get the crappers. Oh, porta potties. People don't think about it. You get no porta potties on the runway, people. Somebody got to go to the bathroom. You can't come over to the building. There's no building. You got to get porta potties there. Logisticians do that. Yours truly, a reservist. I was in the porta potty business for a while. Yeah.
More crap.
I was on the ship. What Mike was asking, I was on the ship. We didn't know what, there's 1,500 Marines and 300 ships company. We know what's going on. Some guy had some antenna on the back of our ship, and he gets CNN all the time. So I go, and we find out what was going on. The captain talked once a day on loudspeaker for about a minute. Yeah, that's where you got the reality.
I know. I can tell you another.
And
I can tell you a story about the Blues Brothers, for example. We had two bombs called the Blues Brothers that we were going to drop. The Iraqis had dug a big trench, and they were filling it with oil, and they were going to put it on fire. That was going to stop the invasion from the direction we were coming. We're a little concerned about that. So we were going to blow out the fire with the Blues Brothers. These two bombs, they're World War II leftover bombs, they have a big snorkel nose on them, and they hit this, they drop and they go down, the parachute on the back, and they drop down, hit, and then they detonate just above the ground, so they create this overpressure. And the word got out to the press about the Blues Brothers, and they thought it was going to be some entertainment coming on. and so we never referred to them as the Blues Brothers after about 2 nights at 3rd Army headquarters. Because, again, we weren't trying to mislead the press in any way, shape, or form. We wanted to completely control it. So, I mean, there's a lot. I could tell you about the dead cow stories and things like that. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I hope you got a flavor of just a phase from March the 1st to the end of July, just a sampling of what the Army does besides close, kill the enemy. We rebuild nations. We are the one and only, as General Holland, a 2-star general from the coalition forces said in the back of the book, it doesn't take a hero by Norman Schwarzkopf. Thank God for the United States. Because when you think of Nazis under Hitler, Tojo, when you think of Mao, if one of those superpowers come to be instead of the United States, what would the world be today? If Stalin or Lenin were in charge. Thank God for the United States and the United States Army. I mean, the Marines and the Navy and the Air Force today deserve all the credit and do wonderful, wonderful things. But when you have to have soldiers on the ground, and lots of them, doing many, many different things, the only entity capable of doing that is the United States Army, made up of citizen soldiers like myself